In 1912, a German archaeologist named Ludwig Burchard was excavating the ruins of a city that had been abandoned for 3,000 years. The city was Amarna, ancient Akhenaten, the capital that the pharaoh Akhenaten had carved from the desert. Limestone of Middle Egypt, and one of the most audacious acts of political and religious will in the history of the ancient world. A city built from nothing in 5 years, a city occupied for perhaps 15 years at its peak, a city abandoned so completely after its founder's death that within a generation the desert had begun reclaiming it. The wind filling its streets. With sand, its temples falling silent, its name erased from the official records of the Egyptian state with the specific, deliberate thoroughness of a civilization trying to pretend something had never happened. Burchard's team was excavating the workshop of the chief royal sculptor, a man named Thutmose, whose title connected him to the highest levels of the royal artistic establishment, whose workshop contained the working models and the unfinished pieces. And the artist references that a sculptor serving the royal court would accumulate across a career of extraordinary patronage in the rubble of the workshop storeroom. Found a bust, painted limestone, 50 centimeters tall, a woman's head and neck, the neck rising from a squared base with the specific structural elegance of an object, designed to be a sculptor's reference model rather than a finished dedicatory piece, a working tool, in other words, not a monument. The paint intact, the colors preserved by 3,000 years of sand and sealed air, the left eye socket empty, the right eye inlaid with a dark pupil of rock crystal set in white quartz, the eyebrow rendered in precise strokes of dark pigment, the lips curved, in an expression that occupies the exact space between serenity and the faintest suggestion of amusement, the most recognizable face in the ancient world. Nerfi. The bust was removed from Egypt under circumstances that the Egyptian government has contested ever since. The excavation records appear to have understated its significance in a way that, in the most charitable interpretation, was a failure of accurate documentation, and the less charitable one was deliberate misrepresentation designed to ensure that the object would be allocated to the German expedition rather than to the Egyptian Antiquities Authority. It arrived at the Egyptian Museum in Berlin in 1913. It has been there ever since. Despite decades of Egyptian requests for its return, despite the specific irony that the most famous face of ancient Egypt lives in the German capital rather than in the country where it was made, the face looks out from its case, calm, composed, the blue crown, the distinctive cylindrical crown of the Egyptian queen that no other woman depicted in the entire corpus of ancient Egyptian art wears in the same specific, commanding way, rising above the face with the specific visual grammar of authority. She is the most famous queen in ancient history, and she is almost entirely a mystery. Her origins are unknown. Her family is unknown. Her specific role in the religious revolution that her husband, Akhenaten, imposed on Egypt, the revolution that abolished the traditional Egyptian pantheon and replaced it with the worship of a single deity, the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, is contested. Her fate after Akhenaten's death is one of the most fiercely debated questions in Egyptology, a field whose practitioners are not generally known for the ferocity of their disagreements, but who have, in the case of Nefertiti, produced competing theories with a passion that suggests the question touches something deeper than the academic. What happened to her? Where did she go? Did she die in Amarna, victim of the plague that the archaeological evidence suggests swept through the city in its final years? Did she outlive her husband and rule Egypt in her own name, not as queen consort, not as regent, but as pharaoh, her name changed, and her image appearing on the monuments of the brief reign that followed Akhenaten's death? Did she become Smenkhare? Did she become Neferneferuaten? Or did she simply vanish as thoroughly as the city she had helped to build? As completely as the religious revolution she had stood beside and possibly driven, swallowed by the specific, historical silence that the Amarna period's enemies imposed on everything connected to it? The answers, or the closest thing to answers, that 3,000 years of silence and incomplete evidence can provide require understanding not merely the queen herself, but the world that made her possible, the world that needed her, and The world that eventually tried to erase her. The world of Egypt at the height of its power. The new kingdom at its golden peak. Nefertiti has no childhood. This is the first and most fundamental mystery of her story, the specific biographical void that precedes her appearance in the historical record as the fully formed queen consort of Akhenaten. The woman whose image on the monuments of the early Amarna period shows her already in possession of the complete iconographic vocabulary of Egyptian queenly power. It's already depicted alongside her husband in ways that had no precedent in the history of Egyptian royal representation. She did not emerge from nowhere. She emerged from somewhere that the surviving sources do not clearly document. And the silence around her origins is itself a piece of evidence. A gap in the record that scholars have been trying to fill for over a century with competing hypotheses, whose degree of certainty ranges from the reasonably well-supported to the frankly speculative. The most traditional identification, and the one that the majority of Egyptologists have accepted, with varying degrees of confidence, connects Nefertiti to the family of I. The powerful official who served as the chief advisor first to Akhenaten and then, after the deaths of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, eventually became pharaoh himself in the brief, confused succession that followed the Amarna period's end. I held the title God's Father, a title whose specific meaning in the New Kingdom context is debated but which appears in some cases to denote a father-in-law of the pharaoh. If I was Nefertiti's father, her origins are in the highest levels of the Egyptian administrative and military establishment, not royal by birth, but connected through family ties to the most powerful non-royal networks in the Egyptian state. Her nurse, the woman responsible for her early education and care, whose identity is slightly better documented than Nefertiti's own origins, was named T, who was also A's wife or consort. This connection suggests that Nefertiti was raised within A's household, whether as his biological daughter or as a ward or foster daughter whose social relationship to the household produced the same educational and social formation that biological parentage would have provided. She may not have been Egyptian by birth. The theory that Nefertiti was a foreign princess, specifically a Mitanni princess, the daughter of the Mitanni king Tushratta, who sent a daughter to the Egyptian court as part of the diplomatic marriage system that connected the great powers of the late Bronze Age world, has been advanced and debated with the specific academic passion that the absence of conclusive evidence both permits and encourages. The Mitanni were the great northern power of the era, state-centered in what is now northern Syria and southeastern Turkey, whose royal family maintained close diplomatic and matrimonial connections with the Egyptian New Kingdom through the reign of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father. A Mitanni princess arriving at the Egyptian court as a diplomatic bride would have been educated in the Egyptian language and the Egyptian court culture that her role required. The theory is attractive. It is not proven. What is clear is that Nefertiti received an education of exceptional quality, the education that prepared a woman for the specific, demanding role she would eventually occupy at the center of one of the most complex and turbulent periods in Egyptian history. The Egyptian language, its written and spoken forms, the religious traditions of the Egyptian court, the political culture of the New Kingdom monarchy with its specific protocols and its specific expectations of queenly behavior, the artistic and architectural ambitions that the Egyptian court expressed in its building programs and its temple decorations. She learned all of it, and she added something the education could not teach, whatever quality it was. The specific combination of personal magnetism and political intelligence, and the specific aesthetic sensibility that the monuments of Amarna capture in her image, she brought it with her when she appeared in the historical record as the wife of the crown prince who would become Akhenaten and the queen of one of the most extraordinary episodes in 3,000 years of Egyptian history. Her name means, in ancient Egyptian, something approximating, "The beautiful one has come," or "The beautiful one is here." The beauty was real, preserved in the limestone and pigment of the Berlin bust, with a completeness that no other ancient portrait achieves. But the beauty was not the point. It was never the point. The court that Nefertiti Entered when she married the crown prince, was the richest and most sophisticated in the world, Amenhotep. 3. The pharaoh who would eventually be Akhenaten's father and Nefertiti's father-in-law, ruled Egypt at the absolute peak of New Kingdom, power and prosperity. His reign of approximately 38 years was characterized by a level of material wealth, artistic achievement, and diplomatic sophistication that made the Egyptian court the envy of every other great power in the late Bronze Age world. The palace complex at Malkata